Blacksmith of the Apocalypse. By Arcuser. Chapter 1391. The Beast Inside. Whoa, is that the cuirass? Phaenis asked, scaring the blacksmith a little. Early noon of the next day, the chosen of Phobos suddenly visited without a warning. The blacksmith had already started working on the pauldrons and was just working on adjusting them to the cuirass. For that, he had put all the finished pieces of the Sky Dragon armor onto an armor stand to get a feel for the overall look. "Did you already finish the shoulder armor?" she asked with sparkly eyes before he could even attempt to answer her first question. Seth left the armor alone for a moment and turned toward her. "Yes, and yes. And they are called pauldrons. I finished forging them this morning, and I'm currently making sure they fit properly," the blacksmith explained to her before turning back to fitting the shoulder pieces to the cuirass and helmet. Although he had been reminded of the power of his trait, he had no intention to change the course this late in the game. They were on a schedule, and he had no time to refresh his knowledge of dragons and Olympian mythology to come up with a way to tweak the pauldrons and gauntlets. "So I missed the song again?" she asked, sounding disappointed. "You are not supposed to hear it anyway. Demonic forging ballads are not for people to listen to," the infernal skald reprimanded. Especially not the one he had used on the pauldrons. It was not a bad song, but the effects it had on others could become quite severe. Sivri had not taken well to the crow killer ballad. Phaenis, an actual being of flesh and blood, may have fared even worse. The blacksmith had also suffered to a certain extent, but as the artist, he was hit to a lesser degree. What was important was that he had succeeded. Phaenis fell silent as she patiently watched the blacksmith go about his work. Following the process, the next step was enchanting the pauldrons. As she watched, he brought the pauldrons to the etching table. For the shoulders, Seth intended to double down on the demonic powers and etch flamboyant runes across. His swift hand wandered over the metal surface, the brush drenched in solution, leaving caustic runes in its wake. The chosen of Phobos felt a quiver in her heart as she witnessed a murky power settle within the runes that ate into the material. She couldn't quite put her finger on it, but the poem, as Seth called it, gave off a dreadful aura. Soon, the left pauldron was done, now emanating a dark vapor. Her eyes were still glued to the piece of armor when she belatedly noticed that the blacksmith had already started working on the second. Although she couldn't read what Seth was putting down, she could clearly see the difference. Not just seeing it, but she could also feel it. The demonic bard was etching a completely different poem onto the right pauldron. It lacked the sinister aura of the left, giving an almost warm impression. Hopefully, the blacksmith would tell her what exactly he was writing on her shoulder. By the time he finished, the right pauldron gained an aura of warmth and force, not quite the opposite of the left, but clearly different. Wiping away his sweat, he put both pauldrons back on the armor stand to get an overall picture. "Is it time to try it on now?" she asked excitedly, instantly equipping her under armor. "Well, I didn't intend to, but you seem eager, so go ahead." "Let's see," the blacksmith agreed after giving it a moment of thought. Seth also finally got to see the effect of the hide of the false god in action. When Phaenis put on the armor, her whole skin didn't turn blue like a smurf as Seth expected, but gained a healthy, bronze hue, like a shiny tan. "It feels a little weird, but not uncomfortable," she mentioned, as they put on the pauldrons. The moment they were equipped, he was proven right. The pauldron fit her and the rest of the armor perfectly, and there was no need for the blacksmith to rework anything. If he had not been confident, he would not have immediately turned to enchanting the pieces. "What did you enchant the shoulder with?" she asked, checking her range of movement. Meanwhile, the blacksmith had stepped back to the anvil, forging the soul, which was hard for her to even see. Not stopping his hammering, Seth took a moment to think of how to phrase it. "The left one carries the ballad of the beast inside. The effects tie in with the forging ballad and will strengthen your power to pursue opponents," the blacksmith gave a rough explanation. The full extent would only be set once the items were completely finished. "Although it has a chance to cause a berserk state, I think that is plenty taken care of by the powers of the helmet. However, to make sure, I added the Eye of March Osseous poem to the right shoulder. It should help with willpower, strength, and mental resistance." Seth revealed the rough effects of the Blessing of March Osseous, which was the name of the effect of the poem. "I see. Cool." Phaenis pretended to understand whatever he just said. She didn't know it, but she would need the little extra for her mental health, as Seth didn't just double, but decided to triple down on the demonic powers for the pauldrons. Not only the forging ballad and enchantments, but also the enchantment for the soul armaments were of demonic nature. The soul forging didn't take long, as the structure of the pauldrons was nothing fancy or complicated. By the time Phaenis grew tired of playing around with the armor and placed it back on the stand, Seth brought the soul pauldrons to the etching table. For the soul, he had used the second-to-last massive soul of the dragon newt souls he had refined. The soul of the draconic strength was the essence of the attack skills he had extracted from the many dragon newt souls he had harvested when hunting Pithra. For the enchantment of the soul, he had chosen a poem called Of Dogs, Men, and Griffins, dedicated to the demon Bune, a demonic dragon boasting incredible strength. As expected of a demonic dragon focused on strength, his taste was Spartan, so the poem only had 3 lines, which roughly translated to: A dog's strength is to serve. A man's strength is to act. A griffin's strength is to lead. Power lies within every role. Seth wasn't very impressed by the lines, but he guessed the demon liked it because it attributed strength to each of its 3 heads, which were a dog head, the head of a man, and the head of a griffin. It just showed how important the taste of the patron when it came to a targeted piece of art, not so much its artistic relevancy. Which was good news for the blacksmith, if he ever intended to venture further into making original works. If it were just about pandering, he could do that. On the other hand, it was not the most powerful kind of enchantment, owing to Phaenis' request to have only passive effects if possible. Of Dogs, Men, and Griffin created the passive effect to slightly increase one's strength and physical attack when serving, commanding, or acting on your own. It was another ballad that came without a certain price. The demonic power seeping into the soul through the runes was the price for the performance of the work and etching. Since it didn't need Seth to negotiate soul payments, and he wasn't distracted by channeling, the etching was quickly done. It was just 3 lines, after all. Taking the pauldrons from the stand, he infused the 2-parted soul into each of them and placed them into the waters of Styx to finish the second-to-last set of the Sky Dragon armor. Ding! You have finished a legendary item. Plus 100p of power of existence x2. Ding! Various powers have interacted with each other and changed the effects of your set. That last notification sounded a little different, he thought to himself and checked the pauldrons. Chapter 1392 Sky Demon Shoulder. Sky Demon Shoulder. Legendary. Sky Demon Shoulder set 1/2. Sky Dragon Armor set 1/X. Physical DEF, 2200. Mag, Def, 2400. Durability 6200. 1 negate 60% magic damage. 2 negate 40% physical damage. 3 Sky Dragon Magic. 4 Trait, Griffin Heritage / Left, Dog Heritage. 5 Bune's Strength, Magic, / Bune's Strength, Physical. 6 Trait, Crow Killer. 7 Passive Skill, Power of March Osseous / Left, Wolfen. 8 Passive Skill, of Wolves, Crows, and Dragons / Left, of Dogs, Crows, and Griffins. Sky Demon Shoulder set 2/2. Trait, Bune's Heritage. Passive Skill, of Dogs, Men, and Griffins. Passive Skill, of Wolves, Dogs, and Dragons. Sky Dragon Armor set, to be updated. A pauldron smothered in demonic powers created by Master Smith, the first Master Blacksmith and Master Enchanter of Earth. Created from the legendary heart scales of a Sky Dragon, it is enchanted with demonic powers, influencing each other. What happened? The blacksmith silently exclaimed in his mind, as he checked the effects of the pauldron. Not only had some options he expected changes, but there were 3 additional passive skills, and 3 traits that seemingly came out of nowhere. Seth ignored Phaenis' stare as he tried to make sense of the current state of the items. First, the traits. The Crow Killer trait was expected, as it was the effect of the forging ballad. Apart from that, Seth had planned for the Dragon Heritage trait, since he used a Dragon Newt Soul and the Dragon Scales. It must have been this one that had been changed, but why did it become 3? Judging by the names, it had something to do with the power of Bune. Heck, everything was somehow tied to the power imbued into the 3 short sentences. The left pauldron had the Dog Heritage, while the right had the Griffin Heritage, the set effect had Bune's Heritage, and they all followed more or less the same pattern as the expected passive skill, except that what they raised was everything Dragon Heritage raised. Dog Heritage raised attack, defense, and self-healing by 20% when serving someone or acting on their orders. Griffin Heritage did the same in case you were in a commanding position. Bune's was a slight exception, as it was always active and also raised mana regeneration by the same degree. The other obvious effect of the poem were the slew of passive skills that were added to the individual items and the set effect. Of dogs, crows, and griffins, left. Of wolves, crows, and dragons, right. Of dogs, men, and griffins, set. Of wolves, dogs, and dragons, set. The original of dogs, men, and griffins was still the same as the blacksmith intended. If the conditions were met, the wearer's overall damage and defense were raised by 15%. In of dogs, crows, and griffins, the conditions for dogs and griffins stayed the same, but it seemed like the strength of crows was the pursuit. So one would gain the buff when chasing a target. It was similar for the other two skills. The condition changed, but the buff stayed the same. The strength of wolves was the pack, so one gained the buff when fighting in a party. The strength of dragons was the opposite. The strength of dragons was apparently solitude, as one would gain the buff when fighting solo. At this point, no matter what Phaenis did, at least one of these buffs would apply, and in the best case. Seth halted for a moment when he realized the boon of not just the duplicate skills, but also the duplicate traits. None of them stated that the effects didn't stack. If she were chasing someone, she would gain the buff of the crow twice, or when she was fighting alone, she would gain the buff of the dragon twice. On top of that, like in the original skill, none of these were exclusive to each other, except for wolves and dragon. If she chased someone at a party based on an order, she would gain the buffs of wolves x2, crows x2, and dogs x3, which would more than double her overall damage and defense. The effects of the items had become a lot more powerful than Seth had planned for. As for the how, it was clearly mentioned in the notification and flavor text of the item. It was the power of the four demons interacting with each other, the soul, and the material. The wolves were probably Marshasas, who were usually depicted as a wolf, with griffin wings and a snake tail. The dragon had to be Bune, the demon dragon, as well as the soul and the scales. As for the crow, it had to be the forging ballad, although Seth didn't know what demon it actually belonged to. It was not mentioned in the book. He knew a few great demons that took the form of a crow or a raven, but none of their attributes fit the savage song. However, it had to be the source of the crows. Apart from the skills and traits, there was only one simple change left. It was the effect Bune's strength, which would have been the culmination of the skills of the Dragon Newt souls. Since Dragon Newts focused mostly on physical attack skills, it would have raised all physical attack skills by some amount. Bune, however, was a demonic dragon well versed in strength and magic. Bune's strength on the right pauldron raised the power of magic attack skills by 3 levels, while it raised physical attack skills on the left. Only when he figured these out for himself did he turn to the chosen of Phobos, who was looking at him with expectant eyes. So he started with the intended effects and skills before he laid out his own insights. A part of the Sky Dragon effect, bought Pauldron Grand the Crow Killer trait. It helps conceal your presence, increases the power of sneak attacks, and adds a bleeding and slow effect to your slashing attacks. Seth roughly explained the trait. She would get a better feeling for it when wearing it later than when listening to him explaining it. The next easiest was Bune's strength, which raised the level of all attack skills by 3 when both pauldrons were worn. With that, he transitioned to explaining the differences between the 2 shoulder armors. The right one grants you power of March Osseous, which raises strength, willpower, and mental resistance based on your situation. It helps you to rise up to the challenge, improving all 3 by up to 25%. On the left, you have the passive skill Wolfen, which improves speed, attack speed, and bleeding effects, the bar explained succinctly, before he started with the slew of remaining traits and skills. Explaining when they took effect and how they stacked was what really got her eyes glistening. Like any other piece and set of the armor, the pauldron, independent from the full set, was already extremely powerful. They would only shine brighter in synergy with the rest of the set, and that was what really got Phaenis excited. They were still missing the gauntlets, but the set already had the potential to make her several times stronger than she already was. Which was exactly the point of a personalized set. When Seth was done with the explanation, he placed the pauldrons on the armor stand and they both stared at the armor for a while. So, tomorrow it's the gauntlets and then it is finished. Phaenis broke the silence. Yes, I guess so, the blacksmith said. If he finished the Sky Dragon armor the next day, it would mean that he had cranked out a full legendary armor set within a week. At this pace, he might actually be able to keep the schedule. Well, then, until tomorrow. Good night, Phaenis said and stood up to leave. Good night. Chapter 1393 Laser, Lightning, Lohe. Sea of trees. A slender man wearing an outfit of nettle green cloth and natural tanned leather came jogging into the great hall. The big assembly house had a floor of hardened earth and a green ceiling of woven, living branches. The sunlight falling through the gaps from above fell on the man's face and antlers, as he kneeled before his chieftain. Sitting on a throne grown from roots was a man twice his size. His clothing didn't differ much from the scout kneeling before him, only the thick golden torque around his neck and the silver circlet on his head identified his higher standing. Anzoni, you are disrupting the assembly. I hope you have something important to report that explains this transgression, he asked the scout. The bird and the weird sky centipede have returned the western eye, the horned scout began. But they are not alone this time. They are accompanied by a huge number of men, at least 200, and a giant beast eating the blooming trees like grass, he reported the advent of new visitors. The chieftain's chiseled face stiffened in concern. What are they doing? Do you think it will impede the containment measures? He asked. They had only found the western eye recently and moved to contain it, although their effort had only managed to slow down the spread. This assembly was precisely to talk about the procurement of materials for proper containment. Anzoni halted for a moment, remembering the scenes of lightning strikes, bright rays of light, and firestorms eradicating the outer ring of affected trees. The giant beast they had brought was seen eating a swath into the surrounding unaffected trees, widening the perimeter. If you allow speculation, my chieftain. I believe they are on the move to implement their own containment, Anzoni finally said, causing the assembly to fall silent. Aren't those undead? Cathyrix asked his colleague as they watched a group of rotten knights swarm out along the scorched ring surrounding the tainted woods. Seeing the newcomer use chained spirits gave him just another reason to worry. Within the ashen ground, he could already see fresh, black saplings raise their heads. With their wards gone, the spread would rapidly speed up. If they left this alone, there would be another mouth to deal with. I will go report to the leader. Not enough that they burn our temporary wards, but now they are sending out these things. This time, the group leader won't be able to stand back. We have to step in, she said, and stood up to run back to their camp. She was suddenly caught by a black chain. Where do you think you are going? A threatening voice shook the forest. The dark chain woven from magic was tightly strung around her hip. Holding the other end was a figure wrapped in black robes, black crystalline armor, and the thick aura of death. How had they not noticed an entity oozing danger and destruction like this? Catharix's heart quivered. They stood no chance. Before he could move to help Rysina, she was thrown into the clearing with a single pull of the dark chain. Her hands helplessly tried to grasp anything, but she only left traces in the soft, ashen ground. She was thrown around, and a boot was planted on her sternum, pinning her to the ground like a bug. In horror, the horned one could only cover her face and accept her fate, tears shooting in her eyes. Oh, hey! You guys look like Uno and Tirlach. Are you also horned ones? Are there more of you? Suddenly, the bright voice of a young woman echoed from the terrifying certification of death. Surprised, Rysina stared up at the being of doom that had caught her, only to find that it was a fairly attractive human woman, wearing a black crown and dark armor. The aura she was exuding stood in clear contrast to the curious, almost friendly expression of her face. The pressure on her chest lessened, and even the chain around her hip loosened. They were not gone. Rysina felt less restrained, calming her just a little. Let Rysina go. The two heard Cathyrix say with a wavering voice, as he stepped out from the woodwork. He had his bow raised and an arrow aimed at the woman on top of her. Oh, you decided to come out? Don't worry, I just intend to have a little talk with you, she said amicably, as Cathyrix was surrounded by silent undead from behind. It was too late by the time he noticed. Now, put down the bow and come with me. I'm sure we have stuff to talk about, she suggested with a smile that didn't accept a no. The horned one looked at the undead surrounding him. They were grotesque beast chimeras, vastly different from the undead knights walking around the clearing. If it were the knights, he might have tried something, but he couldn't even start to comprehend these things. Defeated, he lowered his bow and joined Rysina in being brought away. Guys, look what I found, Evie suddenly returned to camp. Evie? Weren't you going to install the frame generators with your undead? Allison asked her, looking at the chosen of Persephone and the two people captured by an undead chimera walking behind her. They can do that on their own. But look what I came across. Don't they look like Uno and Tirlach? I think they are horned ones, and scouts at that. So, there should be more of them here, don't you think? The necromancer suggested, as the two captives started sweating in the back. I guess so, but why did you capture them? The alchemist asked, curious. Well, they had been observing the undead for a while when one of them suddenly jumped up to run away. I kind of instinctively caught her, the immortal witch explained, a little embarrassed. It was an instinct trained during the weeks spent in a world where a returning scout could spell annoying trouble. Since you already captured them, we should at least interview them. Maybe they have info on the corruption. Eidolon Mo joined the conversation. Since they seemed to be part of a group of people that settled in the forest, the chance they knew something helpful was high. Is that what you call the darkness? The female-looking one of the two suddenly asked. Yes, if you mean the slowly spreading power that is swallowing this forest, we call that corruption, the space mage explained politely, earning a weird look from Evie and Alshan. You understood her? Allison asked, surprised. Of course. You didn't, the other countered, just as surprised. I can kind of understand them, but they use some words I don't know, and others are pronounced weirdly. It's probably the same for Allison. Evie explained. I guess, you can understand them without a problem, since this is a foreign world for you, the witch gave her verdict. I see, the mage said as he was interrupted, when the female interrupted him. Then why are you destroying our wards? It was already hard enough to set up a circumference to slow down the spread, now the darkness will swallow a great part of the forest before she suddenly started throwing blame. Now. I don't know about your wards, but we are currently setting up a barrier to contain the corruption. We have experience in this. Eidolon tried to calm her down and explain their operation. You are containing it, the male horned one asked in disbelief. Yes, we flattened the forest to make space for the barrier anchors, Eidolon assured. Shield cornerstones, I see. You are building a kind of henge to trap it, the horned one mumbled to himself, but his word made the space mage cringe a little. Calling their highly developed barrier tech a henge was somewhat offensive. Right, since we are talking about this, how about our other guests also join the conversation in the open? Edward, who had only listening silently to the side, spoke out loud. His voice echoed in the clearing and spread in the forest. It was silent for a moment before a huge horned one, wearing a torque and a circlet, stepped out from the forest, followed by an armed group of more horned ones. Very well, let us talk. Chapter 1394 Nico, are you done? Mine is Mar. You know why I'm here, Nico. Are you done with the gloves? The blacksmith asked after a quick greeting. I want to make the gauntlets today and they are on the table over there. They have been finished for a couple of days, the tailor interrupted him. He pointed at a workbench beside the door, without looking up from the pure white cloth in his hands. Seth squinted at the sight of the cloth, he knew that thread. He had seen it not too long ago, used in the brutal murder of a legendary lich. So, this was where it went after the battle. Nico had actually managed to weave it into a fabric. The blacksmith deliberated for a moment whether to ask what he was planning to do with the legendary cloth, but decided to leave it to Nico Booz. The man was a master tailor and deserved a modicum of trust after they had worked together for so long. He was sure Booz would proudly present a legendary robe to him when the time was ripe, probably something fit for the few healers they had. Oh, thanks for the gloves, he simply said in the end and grabbed the gloves after giving them a quick appraising look. Nico was not as experienced as Nadal, despite reaching the status of a master earlier, so the gloves didn't come with as many additional options as the boots. However, the spell weaver had his own methods and managed to do something Nadal couldn't. The gloves were made from the same wing leather as the boots, but Booz had managed to convert the power of increased flight speed into a different effect using his magic threads. Instead of increasing the flight speed of the wearer, the gloves had the option to increase the speed and damage of thrown weapons. Seth didn't know how often Phaenis used throwing weapons, but it was a great option for someone like Monique, who hurled spears for a living. Seth was sure the former mountain brigand had experience with throwing knives, so maybe the gloves that raised the speed and damage of thrown weapons by 35% would be helpful to her as well. The chance was definitely higher than Phaenis suddenly learning a way to fly, to make increased flight speed a relevant effect. With the leather gloves at hand, Seth returned to his own workshop, where he found Cerberus already waiting at the forge. The workshop assistant had already placed one of the heart scales on the anvil. Unlike the mitten design he had used for Bart's climatic gauntlet that covered barely half his forearm, the gauntlets for the Sky Dragon armor had articulated fingers and connected to the pauldrons at the elbow, covering the whole forearm. For the gauntlets, Seth had chosen the Blessing of Violence. The simple reason was that most effects of the armor that increased damage were either in general or best used in single combat. Phaenis still lacked something that could help her fight groups of people. However, he wasn't putting his everything into the performance, since he actually wanted the weakened version of the passive skill. At full power, the ballad would create a skill that would increase attributes and improve base stats by 20% with each kill, even permanently increasing a random attribute once in a while. However, this skill was hard to manage, as it came with strong mental corruption. Considering all the other effects that would already burden Phaenis, he decided it was better not to increase the chance of berserk or demonic possession. Since he had some experience with the song, the bard nerfed the ballad deliberately. He endured the connection to the addict of battle and violence and delivered an okay performance. Although the demon's violent nature coming through the connection was disruptive, the forging proceeded without any complications. Seth was able to fully focus on forging the intricate scales for the fingers, plates for the hand, and the joints that connect them to each other. With great care, he then attached them one by one to the gloves Nico Booz had prepared for him. Like the ballad, these were not his first gauntlets of this kind. Still, it took a while to make two such intricate gauntlets, so it was around 14 o'clock by the time the two forged gauntlets finally rested on the anvil. The blacksmith also sank down on a nearby chair and took a moment to rest. He had forged and sung for 8 hours straight. Although he barely felt the time fleet by, his body felt the fatigue. It was time to get a meal and replenish his energy reserves before powering through the next step of the process. On the way to the cafeteria, suspicion grew in him. It had been suspiciously silent all morning. He would have expected Phaenis to try and drop by at some point, not that he would have heard if she knocked at the door. She probably remembered his words and stayed away from the workshop while he was performing a forging ballad. Nodding to himself, he entered the dining area, also suspiciously quiet. Although it was already a little late for lunch, there was almost nobody there. Link, something the matter, or why is it so quiet here? Link. Oh, Tower Master. The head chef at Delta. Apparently, some of the guilds are holding a parade for the finished repairs in the district, one of Link's chefs holding the ladle in his absence informed him. A parade? Seth asked, perplexed, as he held up his dish for her to shovel food in. Now that she mentioned it, he vaguely remembered seeing a flyer about it. The reconstruction in Delta was one of the things Mary had been working on. But since he was not needed for it, he had simply forgotten in his crafting spree. I guess it may have been fun to take part, the blacksmith mumbled to himself, imagining the kind of spectacle Mary would have come up with. It's not too late, you can still go, the last chef standing suggested. Seth gave her a wry smile. Although it sounded like a fun idea, the blacksmith was not the kind of person who enjoyed big crowds. Nah, I'm good. He had gotten a long way from his almost chronic aversion against big crowds of people, which didn't mean he voluntarily subjected himself to such a situation. The thought of finishing the legendary set made him chuckle unwittingly. The blacksmith ate his lunch and left again, returning to his workshop. When Phaenis returned from the parade, she would find the whole set finished. Delta. Music filled the streets of the sprawling cityscape, flourishing in the shadow of the guardian tree. A long procession of golems on golem steeds and oath guards on pets was walking down one of the main streets toward the foot of the tree. It was not just a celebration, but also a show might for Mina's march. Most members of the guild currently free and present in Delta were assembled to take part in the event. The people of Delta were lining the street on both sides, cheering. Looking up at the sky, he soaked up the atmosphere and took in the sight of the giant tree, adorned by the famous floating peaks. Delta, he had really returned, and things had changed since he was here the last time. Who would have thought their reputation would make such a turn? All it took was taking control of the place and protecting it from certain doom. Things were so busy, it was best he waited for the parade to end before going to the embassy. How would they react when he returned now? Do you really think they will remember who you are? The annoying voice asked spitefully. I wasn't gone for that long. And I grew quite a bit since then. I'm sure I can join the field teams now, he said confidently. After a terribly chaotic journey through several worlds, he had managed to return to Earth and was not even too far away from Delta. He enjoyed the joyous mood, as if it were a welcome party for himself. When the parade finally ended, Paolo turned toward the embassy. Time to return home. Chapter 1395 Headless Rider. The sharp carving tool made of adamantium had no problem cutting smooth grooves into the demonically enchanted dragon scale. The sharp carving tool made of adamantium had no problem cutting smooth grooves into the demonically enchanted dragon scale. The enchantments had soon found their place on the pair of gloves, leaving them ready for the next step, the soul. Seth was lucky, or rather, Tunamole was lucky to be alive, having survived an encounter with what seemed like the stronger representatives of Earth's supernatural fauna. According to the goat, Governor Adam had insisted that the beast had rivaled the questing beast in strength. Soul of the Headless Rider, epic, massive, crafting material. The soul of a dark fairy, the Dul Ahan. A frightening creature resembling a Doom Knight in power and nature. Affinity with darkness, combat skills, and illusion. Trait, Harbinger of Doom. Not only was it massive and epic, but the appraisal likened it to the soul of a Doom Knight. Doom Knights were similar to Death Knights, but unlike them, they relied on their raw power, skill, and psychological pressure, without dabbling in necromancy. Although the soul didn't have an interesting geese, it was perfect for Phaenis and meshed well with the enchantments of the gauntlets so far. He had also chosen the enchantment to go along with it. After separating the soul into two almost separated parts and forging them into replicas of the gauntlets, he started engraving basic Olympian attack into the soul. It was one of the handful of Olympian enchantments he had unlocked with enchantment leave 3. The ones unlocked at level 3 were no longer directly connected to attributes, but were compounds of multipliers, as far as he understood. Basic Olympian attack, for example, increased the multiplier of physical and magical attack per strength or intelligence by 25%, meaning that it raised the base attack of the wearer, on which most other effects were based. The only shame was that these skills explicitly stated that they would not stack. Otherwise, Seth would have plastered the armor with it. The initial forging had taken a while, and the soul forging wasn't much less intensive, while the increased performance of the higher-leveled enchantments showed in the complexity of the circuit he had to engrave into the soul. It became late, around 10 p.m., when he finally finished the last two pieces of the first Sky Dragon armor set. He received the pair of gauntlets with a slew of notifications about finishing and synergies, however, the most important ones were: Ding! Synergies between all pieces of the set have changed the set effect. Ding! You have finished a legendary set with a chance to become a myth. +5 to all attributes. The set actually ended up with a chance to become a myth. Taking a deep breath to calm down a little, Seth didn't directly look up the armor's full set effect and checked how the synergies had affected the gauntlets, or Dread Knights left and right. Quite liking the new names, he found that the soul of the Dul Ahan had reacted to the enchantments he had concocted for Phaenis. Apart from the legendary effects, which had not changed, both gauntlets had the nerfed Blessing of Violence. It no longer had the initial increase in attributes or the power to raise attributes. The only power that remained was increasing base stats by 10% for 1 minute after a kill. This could be stacked up to 5 times, increasing base stats by 50%. It had lost a considerable amount of power, but the price had also lowered in exchange. The explicit malice was gone, and the only drawback that remained was it slightly lowered the resistance against the Berserk status when the maximum kill streak was held for a long time. This was where the similarities between the gloves ended, apart from the set effect. Seth had enchanted the left gloves with a new enchantment, he had concocted using circuits from items he purchased on the auction house. Although it was not a legendary enchantment, it was able to create a peculiar skill. Passive skill, Seizing Grasp, no cost, no cooldown. Run, but you can't escape. When balling your fist while looking at a target, you will be tethered. Starting with a distance of 5 meters, the target will suffer a 10% slow for every meter of distance. Depending on their mental resistance, there is a chance that they won't notice this ailment. At 10 meters distance there will be a comparison of strength. If the wielder is stronger, the target will be stopped. If the wielder is weaker, the tether will rip. This was actually an enchantment meant for safety equipment. Seth had found it on an enchanted rope that would lessen the strain on the one holding it. He had combined it with other enchantments while experimenting with the combination function of the Master Tier enchantment skill. It was the perfect serial killer skill. Even if the victim was faster and running away, they wouldn't even notice that they were becoming slower, while the user followed them comfortably. Or at least, Seth thought so, until he found that the Seizing Grasp skill had reacted with the Dul Ahan soul, creating the next passive skill on the left glove. Active skill, Dullahan's Chase, no cost, no cooldown. Escape is for naught. When balling your fist while looking at a target, you will be tethered. Starting with a distance of 10 meters, you gain an additional 10% speed for every meter between you and the target. At 30m distance, there will be a comparison of strength. If the wielder is stronger, the target will be pulled back toward you at a speed depending on the strength difference. If the wielder is weaker, the tether will rip. With both of these, it wasn't just about chasing or catching someone. Seth could already imagine how someone with an agile fighting style like Fianus would use the tethers to throw enemies around, by deliberately forcing a comparison of strength, although she would most likely lose out in those when it came to really big beasts or monsters. But in a fight against humanoids? Unless it was someone on par with the field teams of Minas Mar, he doubted they stood a chance. While the left gauntlet had the fun stuff, the right one held the key to ruin the mood. Demoralizing Strike was an enchantment he had found on a gauntlet he bought from the auction house, and thought it was perfect to aid Fianus' already existing roster of powers. The passive skill quite simply gave every attack a chance to cause the status ailment demoralized on the opponent. The selling point was that the success chance, duration, and strength of this were bound to the difference in damage of the attacker and the defense of the target, as well as the target's resistance to mental effects. Following this was the first and only active skill of the whole set. From the synergy between the soul and the enchantment, the skill Dullahan Slash was created. It had a guarantee to cause demoralize for 30 seconds and minor decay for 10 seconds on the target. Before considering the target's resistances, decay would deal 2% max health as damage every second. Although the gauntlets did not have as many individual effects, all of them were quite good, and that was ignoring the set effect. They had not really changed from what Seth had expected. The Dullahan Soul raised all night type skills by 3 levels and granted the effect of Blade of Decay, which gave every attack a small chance to inflict the target with decay. But what really sold the soul was the trait it granted Harbinger of Death, which really played into Fianus' strong points. Just by being seen by hostile targets, it would lower their resistance to mental status effects and damage. A great difference in level could directly inflict fear on sight. Seth anticipated it to work well with other effects of the set, like the auras of Phobos and Conibus, or the effects of the hide of the Brazen Bull. After checking the powers of the gloves, he finally felt ready to have a look at the set effects of the full armor, which had finally been updated. _________________________________________________________________ Dread Knights left. Legendary. Dread Knight set 1/2. Sky Dragon Armor set 1/X. Physical DEF, 2200. Mag, Def, 2400. Durability 6200. 1 negate 60% magic damage. 2 negate 40% physical damage. 3 Sky Dragon Magic. 4 Passive Skill, Blessing of Violence. 5 Passive Skill, Seizing Grasp. 6 Passive Skill, Dullahan's Chase. Dread Knight set 2/2. Blade of Decay. Olympian Attack. Trait, Harbinger of Death. All night type skills are raised by 3 levels. Sky Dragon Armor set, Collapsed. A gauntlet that leaves no room for escape, created by Master Smith, the first Master Blacksmith and Master Enchanter of Earth using mysterious and demonic means. The perfect equipment for anyone who does not enjoy the thrill of the hunt. Chapter 1396 Dread Knight Set. Dread Knight's Right. Legendary. Dread Knight set 1/2. Sky Dragon Armor set 1/X. Physical DEF, 2200. Mag, Def, 2400. Durability 6200. 1 negate 60% magic damage. 2 negate 40% physical damage. 3 Sky Dragon Magic. 4 Passive Skill, Blessing of Violence. 5 Passive Skill, Demoralizing Strike. 6 Passive Skill, Dullahan Slash. Dread Knight set effect 2/2. Blade of Decay. Basic Olympian Attack. Trait, Harbinger of Death. All night type skills are raised by 3 levels. Sky Dragon Armor set effect 10/10. Grants title, Jabberwock for as long as the set is worn. Trait, Dread Dragon. Magic Singularity. Passive Skill, Speed Demon. A gauntlet to smite and deconstruct the enemy, forged by Master Smith, the first Master Blacksmith and Master Enchanter of Earth, using mysterious and demonic means. A piece of great might, even without its companion. Part of an armor set with a chance to become a myth when its reputation spreads across worlds. Jabberwock, the blacksmith thought, perturbed at the appearance of a name he didn't know. Maybe it was because he had Phaenis on his mind, but he felt awkwardly reminded of Yatagan Mem, another random name that had popped up without his own involvement. This was the first time Seth found an item granting a title. Another first was seeing a conditional title. Still, at first glance, the set effect for the whole armor looked underwhelming. Just 4 nondescriptive lines. However, the blacksmith had already experienced that great things could hide behind a small line in the description of an item. So, when he looked into it, each of the effects was packing and their luggage was not small. The title Jabberwock granted the trait Jabberwock Constitution, which raised health regeneration by plus 75% for wounds not caused by legendary means, granted immunity to poison, fear, and charm, and gave the passive skill Predator's Instinct. Passive skill, Predator's Instinct, you are able to track any target you wounded for 24h. Jabberwock Constitution was certainly one of the most powerful and useful traits he had seen so far. Immunity to poison alone was massive, but it was only one of 3 effects that were completely blocked. Almost doubling health regeneration and supernatural tracking were also really good. Contrary to his first impression, if this were the only set effect, Seth might have already been satisfied, but there were more. Another trait the armor granted directly, without a title, was Dread Dragon, and it was an iteration of what Seth hoped for in the set effect. The blacksmith had hoped that Phaenis would also gain an effect like his dragon might, as it would stack with her various auras and skills, disseminating fear among her opponents. The trait automatically cast Dragon Fear on hostile opponents and lowered the damage of opponents that fear the wearer by 20%, in addition to the negative effect Fear already has as a status effect. It didn't sound as cool as the title, but acceptable nonetheless. What really surprised him was the effect of Magic Singularity, which was probably the stable effect the Sky Dragon set would gain, without any other effects or synergies. The effect unapologetically doubled mana regeneration, halved the time to cast magical skills, spells, or abilities, and added another 10.000 mana on top of what already came from the armor. Any mage would be able to keep slinging spells for days with this. The last, and probably most humbled effect, was the passive skill Speed Demon. At least that was what one might think, but it was actually a sleeper build. Speed Demon raised all speed multipliers by 15%. It acted in the same way as Olympian Attack, actually raising the base stats, that all other effects would be based on, so the increase was actually massive, considering the rest of the armor. In addition, it was not just one like movement speed, but all speed multipliers, including attack speed or reaction speed, for example. The first effect almost made one forget that the skill also raises stamina regeneration by 20%, which couldn't be ignored or underestimated either. It would also play a big role in preventing Phaenis from running out of steam mid-fight. Although there was no tiered set effect, the blacksmith was more than satisfied with the one it had gotten, especially the Jabberwock title that came out of nowhere and really impressed him. Hopefully, Phaenis would like the complete set. If she didn't, he would have to find someone with her sizes, or build someone with her sizes, the blacksmith thought to himself jokingly as he packed away the armor pieces. The Chosen of Phobos had not appeared before him, despite knowing that Seth intended to finish the set today. It was already so late, the parade would have ended ages ago, right? Maybe she went to an after-show party? Tower, where is Phaenis right now? The blacksmith asked the tower ego. Lady Phaenis is currently fighting. Fighting, the blacksmith interrupted. Why was she fighting? Did something happen during the parade? Seth had a hard time imagining anything past minor disturbances being possible. They had practically repaired and reinforced all defenses of Delta. The only source for unrest would be people already inside or coming from outside, past the strict controls. However, would a minor disturbance keep her occupied this long? Delta, 5 hours earlier. Riding her dire wolf mount and wearing her oath armor Phaenis was part of the head of the parade, as one of the few members of the field teams, present in Delta at the moment. She was together with Ortega and his team, Lord Link and Beamont. Originally, the stars of the field teams were supposed to be here, like Monique, Jonah, Lydia, or Mike, but they either had to join an important mission or their missions had been unexpectedly prolonged. Phaenis would not have been here either if she hadn't stayed back for the Sky Dragon armor. Not that their presence mattered, as the focus of the parade was the Oath Guards and Golems who would take over the lion part in protecting and defending Delta in day-to-day life. The Guardian Tree was great for protection against external forces, but they judged it as too overbearing. It was used for stuff that was essentially police duty. How would people be able to sleep calmly if they knew that the tree above them was able to snatch them up and potentially strangle them to death at any point in time? Or worse, pull them underground and use them as fertilizer? As such, the parade was a show of power, but also an introduction to the future defense force of Delta. Or at least this was as Phaenis understood it. The former bandit leader was not interested in the attention. She was just glad that Ortega and his team were currently taking the limelight in their little section. He had transformed, flaunting his legendary set as an anthropomorphic bull, riding a crimson bull mount. Bull-on-bull action, kind of funny. The procession walked down one of the longest and widest roads of Delta, leading from the plaza where the headquarters of Minas Mar was located, all the way to the east gate of the district. Passing through half the district, the parade was estimated to last for 4 hours. She already felt burned out after just half of it. Still, she forced a smile and waved at the people of Delta, those who had stayed, as well as those who had moved back after Minas Mar took over. It was when she was looking at the crowd on the left and turned back to the people on the right, when she spotted a golden glint of light appearing in the air above the people. She was still processing what it was when several more appeared all along the road. With flashes of warm, golden light, winged beings emitting care and holiness appeared above the people watching the parade, only for their whole aura to shift as their expressions twisted to ones of disgust and hatred. The moment they dove down, Phaenis and the remaining field team members were already on the move. Standing above the person the nearest being had aimed for, the chosen of Phobos blocked a claw-like hand with her yatagan. She took a moment to register the situation elsewhere. The field team members were the first to move, shortly followed by the named golems in the parade and oath guards. Most had managed to block the sudden invaders. However, where they didn't, the being had managed to apprehend their targets. When she tried to make sense of the situation, the being she blocked tried to get around her and attack the person behind her, only to be blocked again. It was not even trying to fight her, completely focused on the guys behind her. On the third exchange, she followed her instinct and evaded, letting things take their course. Chapter 1397 Angel Summoner. Where she just stood, a demonic claw pierced the air. The next moment, the demon it belonged to was tackled to the ground by the winged human. Looking around, she quickly realized what was happening. The guy behind her had revealed himself to be a demon and tried to attack her, and he was not the only one. Every target the invaders had tried to attack had transformed, either under the force of the being that captured them or in an attempt to attack the members of Minas Mar protecting them. More experienced ones acted similarly to her, others didn't notice until the demon broke its claws on the oath armor. The demons were not strong enough to pierce the relic-rated sets, but the ones that got hit still suffered a mean bruise and maybe some broken ribs. Seth would totally chew them out for denting their armor like that. Meanwhile, the winged one had pinned the demon to the pavement, strangling the struggling beast as it was wildly flailing and trying to get out of its grasp. Where the demon claws stuck the newcomer, it slashed oozing with golden blood, but the winged humanoid was like a rabid dog, without a care for the damage it suffered itself, completely fixated on immobilizing and potentially ending the demon. With the reveal of demons in the crowd, the situation took a sudden turn for everyone. So far, things had happened too quickly for bystanders to realize what was going on. By the time they realized that there was an attack, it was already clear that the presumed attackers were actually apprehending a hidden danger. Some people still fell into a panic, while most people were just confused, not knowing how to react at all. At this moment, someone ran out on the street. A young man, wearing ragged robes, and spoke of long and perilous travels. Sorry. Those are my angels. Please calm down, I'm sorry if I surprised everyone, he called out apologetically, but at a volume that could be heard across the venue. Although apologetic, his tone was calm and reassuring. These were angels? Phaenis was distracted by what he called the winged beings. Well, she had heard about the typical depiction of angels after her world was connected to the Pathworks, but to her understanding, angels were beings and helpers of a god. Did that mean the man who just stumbled on the road was a god? They detected demons with evil intentions, and I couldn't hold them back, he admitted embarrassedly. Why are you apologizing? We helped, didn't we? A female angel appeared behind him, her aura was less holy and more lascivious in Phaenis' opinion. Paolo, is that you? Someone suddenly asked over the murmur of the crowd, which was only more confused by the sudden appearance of the owner of the attackers. You know him? Phaenis blurted out, surprised, asking Isabella, the thief of Ortega's party. It was the recently promoted desert warrior who had exclaimed the intruder's name. Yet, he is part of the Oath Guard. Weren't you and Marco always together? Isabella answered Faenus but turned back to Paolo. Wait, Marco? Right, wasn't there a memo that said his partner Vani HMMPH? The big hand of Ortega suddenly covered the mouth of Angar, their healer, before he could blab out any more. I apologize to everyone if we surprised you with this sudden demonstration. We just wanted to show you that even during such a festive day, our security is always tight. Not only when it comes to sniffing out intruders, but even during unexpected attacks, you can count on us. The bull spewed some bullshit as a smokescreen at the same volume as Paolo. Please continue to enjoy the parade, he called out and gestured for Paolo and the field team members to assemble. It was clear that he intended to leave the parade to the Oath Guards and Golem, while they would deal with the sudden return of their missing member. The angels followed them, carrying the apprehended demons. Having quickly returned to the embassy, demons, angels, and Paolo in tow, they reported to Mary about what happened, and then Paolo reported what happened to him. He explained how he was sucked into the pathworks and found himself in a world without the system. How he ended up as a sacrifice in a selection ritual and ultimately became the saint of a foreign god he didn't even know the name of, and changed his class to angel summoner. He left out the part where the strongest angel that forced the contract was a perverted masochist who fell in love with his fist. Paolo also talked about his odyssey when trying to get back. The difficulty of even finding rifts to the pathworks, most of the time, not knowing where they would lead. The many worlds he came through, most of them stuck in a medieval age, if there was any civilization or people at all. His definition of people had also widened, as few of these worlds were purely governed by humans, many didn't have any humans at all. That sounds like navigating an impossible maze. How did you even find back, like at all? Kaldar, the archer of Ortega's team, asked in terror. It was hard for him to imagine that it was even possible to return home like that. It took quite a while until I finally managed to get into a system world, things got easier from there. Though it was harder than expected, since Krina left before I could return, the mentioned. Since Krina left, the local congregation of the system church was more selective in who or what they let through the gate, while connections to Krina were completely cut off after they ran. However, I managed to find a system church that was ready to port me to Earth, though I dropped somewhere around Omega and had to travel here, evading the mutated zombies. Paolo described how he came to Earth. You didn't get infected, did you? Mary asked, concerned. Although the gates were still equipped with the soul-cleansing barrier that could eradicate small infections, if Paolo ended up becoming one of those sentient mutants Cromwell had mentioned in his last report. No, I was hurt once, but my status as an angel summoner gives me immunity to diseases and curses. No need to worry, Paolo assured her of his health. As if a petty, little disease could harm my Paolo, the vixen spoke up, hugging the priest from behind. The angel would keep appearing and disappearing from time to time and start touching Paolo however she liked. The target of the affection only looked embarrassed and a little annoyed. Judging by your story, the angels aren't that strong, but they seemed quite capable earlier. How strong are the angels you can summon? Mary asked the important questions, ignoring the pervert in the room. They grew stronger after contracting with me and becoming affected by the system. Since then, I could not only strengthen them, but they can also level up individually. Taking that into account, they are actually a powerful race. Their level was only judged to be in the 20s when the system assessed them, but they already rivaled someone in the 60s at that point. Since they started leveling up, their strength almost doubled. Paolo explained how the angels were able to rival the advanced Oath Guards in relic-rated armors. The angels were proper monsters, which counted as pets under the system. The angel behind him grinned at the praise. How about a little match? How about we fight? The pervert suddenly said, pointing at Faenus, who had silently listened up to now. I might not be able to take on the bull, but I'm sure we could have an exciting fight, she added with a sadistic smile. It was clear that she thought she could take on Faenus. Not just take her on, but play with her. She felt doubly insulted. Not only did the perv think she could take her on, but she also thought Faenus was weaker than the bull. The chosen of Phobos glared at her, the already empty glass in her hand cracked as she failed to control her strength for a moment. She placed it on the table, where it fell apart. I like your confidence. Let's see if you can keep it. She stood up and signaled the winged woman to follow her as she took a course for the training rooms in the embassy. Chapter 1398 Plucking all her petals. The room she was led to was white and tiled with yellowish marble. It was no arena, but big enough for a little duel. The beautiful female warrior had taken her position at the opposite side of the room. Excitement washed over her body like a slight electric shock as she looked at the slender woman. She grasped her whip tightly. How long had it been since she was able to enjoy the suffering of such a sweet little thing? She was lucky that she was so easily provoked. She chuckled to herself. Just comparing her to the big oaf was enough, and not even Paolo could stop her now. She would thoroughly enjoy deconstructing this little flower and plucking all her petals, one by one. Licking her tensed whip, she enjoyed the cold look her opponent gave her. It would be so arousing to break that stubborn gaze and... "Are you ready, the girl?" Phaenis asked with a voice as cold as a glacier. The angel leader looked her in the eyes and halted for a moment. These eyes were not just cold, but there was a cruelty in them that had her take a second look. This was going to get better than expected. "Yes," she answered, cracking her whip and already summoning the pack into the shadows of the room, ready to jump the girl. They would rip away her shiny armor and defile that pale, perfect. "Good. Then let's begin," the girl said with a cruel tone and a cold smile. She unsheathed her single-edged sword, and in a smooth, circular motion, the blade grew to the size of a long sword and scratched the tiles of the floor. "Domain of..." She didn't get the rest of the sentence. She had given the command to the wolves to attack, but the whole room had suddenly vanished. Standing in a vast, all-encompassing twilight, she was suddenly all alone. All connections were lost. She couldn't feel her bond to her creations. She couldn't feel the tether that connected her to Paolo. She had completely lost her connection to her creator. Her heart shuddered, and coldness crept in through the hole the missing connection to her god had left. Had her god died? Had she abandoned them? What was she going to do now? She was alone. Her body started shaking as she faced the vast twilight, and the weight of solitude and silence was crashing down on her. The crushing weight kept increasing as her thoughts ran in a circle for a hot moment until pain disrupted her thoughts. Wounds started appearing all over her body. This was not the enjoyable pain, like when Paolo. She didn't like this. Not at all. The wounds that were supposed to bleed with golden blood were putrid and blackened with necrosis. They began to rot the moment they appeared. The pain was invasive, sharp, burning, and impossible to ignore. Suddenly, she was rocked by lightning, as if hit with heavenly punishment, aggravating the pain even more. Her whole body started pulsing in pain, and she started wailing. Wailing upon her situation, wailing upon the pain. Why was this happening all of a sudden? How? Why now? Where was she? Why was she suffering like this? Her eyes opened wide when realization hit her. She was in a fight. Right, this had to be an illusion. There was no way her god would abandon her. Nobody could sever her bond with Paolo. The pain stayed, but the fear receded, as she gained confidence. The twilight started flickering before her eyes, and the tiled training room appeared again. However, the moment her vision of reality returned, she bright glint and another lightning strike shot through her, throwing her to the ground. The world was gone again. The only thing that stayed was an incomparable pain, emanating from her face, directly to her brain. Putrid blood sullied her hands as she covered her destroyed eyes that had exploded with mind-numbing pain. With an ear-shattering cry, the angel broke down on the floor, wailing in pain and holding her face. Phaenis had cut her straight through the eyes, the moment she escaped the illusion of fear. It was not just her eyes. Although the deadly poison had not taken effect, her whole body was covered in rotting wounds, oozing a stinking pus. The rest of the room was littered with the bodies of maimed shadow wolves, each missing a couple of limbs. Looking at it now, after venting her emotions, Phaenis considered whether she may have gone a little too far. Then she remembered the way the bitch had looked at her right before the duel and decided that she had gone just far enough to teach her a valuable lesson. She had deliberately asked Paolo beforehand whether he would be able to heal her as long as she was alive, and he had said yes. The angel had turned into a crying pile of misery, but she was not dead. If she wanted to kill her, it would have been over with the first attack. This should be enough. You can heal them now, Paolo. Phaenis generously ended the one-sided duel, after turning her opponent into a crying mess. Phaenis, we wanted to see what the angels were able to do. This was not helpful, Mary complained about the quick, one-sided battle. She's lucky I don't have my new armor yet. This would have been over even quicker, with the same outcome, she chuckled. Yes, Lady Phaenis was fighting a friendly sparring match in the upper training room too. Just now the tower repeated what it was trying to say before it was interrupted. Oh. Geez, you scared me for a moment. I already thought something had happened at the parade, the blacksmith said, relieved. It would have been a tragedy if something had happened to Phaenis just before he could give her her power up. Something did indeed happen at the parade, the tower revealed suddenly. The bard could only sigh. He was slowly getting annoyed by the fact that the tower only clearly answered what was asked, instead of giving a comprehensive report. What happened? Full report, please. Stop making me ask so many questions. For the next few minutes, Seth was informed about everything that happened during the parade. Paolo's return, the apprehension of demons, the angel summoner's story, as well as the friendly duel to assess the strength of the angels. Ugh, I will deal with that later. Call Phaenis here since she is done with her duel, tower. Isn't it a little late? How about doing that tomorrow? Sivri suggested. If she has the energy to beat someone to a pulp at this time, she can also come by and receive her new armor, the blacksmith said with a shrug of his shoulder. He had been slaving away the whole day, while Phaenis was out having fun at the parade. He wasn't going to show her any consideration because of the time of day. The armor would find its owner today, otherwise, he wouldn't be able to sleep calmly. Chapter 1399 of Trees and Horns. Outside, their undead forces were tirelessly working on erecting the anti-corruption barrier and keeping the tenacious forest and its creatures at bay. Barrier generators were buried in the ground like fence posts, and they would create an invisible wall reaching high up and deep into the ground that would block the power of corruption. Meanwhile, Allison and most of the remaining field team members were seated inside their temporary camp's commando tent. It was a huge, olive-green tent, taken from old military reserves in Delta. At the center stood a huge wooden table that didn't really fit the tent, as it was one in the style of Krna. Apart from the members, the chief of the Horned Ones, as well as two of his advisors, were seated around it, holding a meeting to share rather concerning news with the members of Mina's March. And this fence can truly stop the mire from expanding, one of the advisors asked, concerned. Apparently, it had taken them countless sacrifices to find a way to impede and contain the corruption. The Horned Ones were a race of people that existed before magic vanished from Earth. They were descendants of an incarnation of nature, wood and stone, tasked with the protection of forests. After all the effort it took them, they had a hard time believing that strangers suddenly appearing already had a way, maybe even more reliable than their own. Yes, where I come from, we have a lot of experience with this power and created reliable ways to block small pockets like this, Edlian Mo explained, confident in Krna's technology. They could ever cleanse a small area like this, given time. What if the area was bigger? The second advisor asked carefully. All ears pricked when he said that. It was hard to believe he asked this out of curiosity. How much bigger are we talking about? The old mage asked, concerned. When corruption spread, there were usually several stages. They were able to impede and get rid of the lower ones, but when we awakened in this vast forest, we came across a gaping maw, close to the center of the forest, where ancient ruins cover the forest floor. It is like a canyon of darkness, slowly growing as things that fall inside vanish without a trace. The chief spilled the beans, instead of dancing around the topic. So there is already a chasm, Edlian Mo said, concerned into the silence, after the chief explained the situation on their end. If that is what you call the maw, then yes. We were sure to have contained it, but as you can see, small pockets keep appearing in random places in the forest, the chief's advisor explained. When it has already come this far, that is no wonder. When the corruption ate its way so deep that it created a chasm, it is hard to stop the power from seeping through the caves and crevasses in bedrock itself, the space mage explained gravely. Is there a way to stop it? The chief asked solemnly. They couldn't allow this darkness to swallow the forest they claimed as their new home. We currently have none. To close or even stop a chasm, we would need the help of Krna or divine intervention. Only something on the level of a high-ranking god would be able to do anything. The best we can do is plug the holes and look for help, the mage explained with a controlled expression. He couldn't show his own concern openly at this point. The appearance of a chasm often spelled the end of a world. Often, people didn't even survive long enough to see the rise of the beast of corruption. Any stage below that could be reversed, but a chasm meant the door was open, and it was nigh impossible to close it again. What help? How are we supposed to make a big-shot god make a move on our behalf? Lydia asked doubtfully. Let's not jump the crossbow, we have not even seen that thing yet. Maybe it isn't a chasm? Eidolon, could it still be something more manageable? Mina argued, although she knew that she was grasping at straws at this point. Not just she knew, Finn, Lixus, and Bulko also had dark expressions. For her and the latter two, it wasn't just because they heard of the corruption as residents of Krina. Their very own world had only joined the system during the aftermath of the corruption. Although they had only heard about it as fairy tales and myths, part of growing up was realizing that these scary stories were actually not just stories. In their world, the god of the sun and the sky had sacrificed himself to seal a chasm. His death was what caused great upheaval in their world, ultimately leading to its demise, if it wasn't for the system god intervening. I took the sacrifice of a god that acted as the cornerstone of a whole world to stop a chasm. If it really was a chasm, it felt like a death sentence to Earth. Maybe because she was right, or maybe because the old mage similarly wanted to cling to the little hope of being mistaken, he agreed with her. Yes, I think it would be best if I went to have a look. In the meantime, you should focus on finishing the mission here, he said with a wry smile. Looking at the people at the table, Allison had a sudden inspiration when she heard what Eidolon said. They had an expert forest dweller right here in front of them. This was an opportunity. Since you mentioned the mission, you guys wouldn't happen to have a seed, or a piece of a hanging tree. One of those big ones, like the black one on the horizon? Maybe you could help us identify the local herbs, too, she asked the chief and his advisors. Since the horned ones had been dwelling in these woods for an unknown amount of time, wouldn't they be able to help with the main objective they were still missing? At least they would have an extensive knowledge of the flora and fauna inside these mutated shrubs. If they decided to help them, she was sure to get back to Minas Mar a lot quicker. It wasn't like she was needed to deal with the corruption. The horned ones shared some glances, a little bewildered by the sudden change of topic and the complete ignorance concerning the potentially world-ending danger lurking in the east. We do have some spears made of the blood-sucking tree's wood, if that is what you are looking for. If you wish to know more about the herbs in the forest, I will give you one of our scouts, Anzoni, to guide you, the chief said after a moment of wordless communication. Yes. Thank you, the alchemist let out a tiny cheer. Not only would they be able to finish the main objective, but she was going to get someone to help her catalog the herbs in this place. At this rate, she would be able to return to Minas Mar soon. She really missed Nico. Don't you think your priorities are a little skewed right now, Allison? This could potentially destroy Earth, Lydia tried to be the voice of reason. Things will probably sort themselves out. Why are you so worried? The alchemist countered with a shrug of her shoulder. Didn't you hear? We would need a high-ranking god just to attempt stopping it, Lydia exclaimed. You are saying that as if those guys are rare. The question isn't whether we can find one, but what price do we have to pay to make them help us, Allison argued back. The room fell silent at her words. They were all in thought. Her words made sense. At least to the born Erdhans. Eidolon, Mina, Finn, and even the horned ones looked at her in shock. They lacked the irreverence of an atheist like Allison to understand the gods as hired guns that would move for something as secular as profit. Of all of them, Eidolon Mo knew best how hard it was to convince a god. However, as much as he wanted to, he couldn't refute her words. It was not hard to find gods with enough power. At the end of the day, it indeed depended on the price they were willing to pay, he just wouldn't say it out loud in case the more cranky ones listened. Chapter 1400 Little Break. If we manage to contain it, how much time do we have before a beast of calamity would rise? Seth asked solemnly, his finger tapping the desktop in tension. The blacksmith had taken off a couple of days. Thanks to Monique's sudden revelation, his schedule had shifted, so he decided to take 2 days break for various reasons. He wanted to relax a little after the race that was the first Sky Dragon armor and wait for Monique to return. He had already prepared the Olympian silver as instructed by the Chosen One. Another reason was to give Lena time. The princess actually intended to try and convince everyone that Cade deserved the second Sky Dragon armor. Seth had decided to give her the time until he finished Monique's armor. Just when he got ready to relax a little and entertain the thought to go and meet the lost son, Paolo, Mary, and Lena slammed him with the findings of the team in the Sea of Trees. The team had actually met horned ones, who were able to give them detailed info on the inside of the forest. Although that led to the team's initial task being completed quite quickly, Seth couldn't be happy about it. It was as they feared, a chasm had already opened at the center of the forest. According to the description of the Horned Ones, they suspected the chasm to have opened close to the abandoned district of Cerebellum, which would now be roughly in the center between Ypsilon and Avernum, where Seth came from. Things would have stood better if the theocracy had not raised the Starta village, which had kept the pocket of corruption and the forest at bay. Although what the village sealed was only a small side source, they may have found the main well earlier if things had gone differently. They had another potentially world-ending threat to deal with, in addition to all the other internal and external foes already present. At least the ones they knew of. The Horned Ones seem to have impeded the chasm for some time now, so it can't be that big yet. If we reinforce the seal and aid the Horned Ones, I think it will take at least 3 more years before things become irreversible. But that is just an estimate. Eidolon will know more once he had a look, Lena explained, concerned. If we send people out now, it might be enough time to find a deity willing to help us, the princess added. Like the space mage, she was convinced that divine intervention was their most likely option to solve the problem. Why do you ask that? Mary asked Seth suspiciously. While Lena was ready to eagerly talk about problems and solutions, the secretary found it suspicious that Seth's first question after hearing everything was to ask how long they had. If it is that long, we can concentrate on guarding it. We should give the Horned Ones all the tech they could need and leave that duty to them, the blacksmith suddenly said. What are you saying? We have to act immediately. The 3 years are next to nothing. We will probably need it all to prepare a ritual, in case we find a god who is willing, Lena urged, jumping half off her chair. Seth, what is going on? Mary didn't quite react like the princes. She understood that the situation was urgent, or at least Lena judged it to be, however, it was not so urgent to her that she lost her composure. Lena may be overreacting, but don't you think that it is a little too little, considering the potential danger? She tried to argue with Seth, but the blacksmith slid deeper in his chair. Then he suddenly lifted his arm and pointed out the window of the meeting room. Outside, they could see the sunlight fall through the crown of the guardian tree, which was towering above the district. Seth was pointing at it. Have you ever seen a bigger living being than the guardian tree? He asked all of a sudden. No, but that doesn't matter. The tree won't be able to resist the corruption for long, if we allow it to grow stronger for too long, Lena argued almost desperately. Seth ignored that the princess had misunderstood his words. He was not trying to boast about their big tree. I have seen a bigger one. You know the beast slumbering at the center of Y City? The blacksmith asked calmly. The bear with antlers? Mary asked, cocking her head, slightly puzzled. She had read the reports about the battle in Y City. She vividly remembered the descriptions of a huge part of the city being lifted up into the sky on the antlers of the giant bear. We don't need a god, we already have one. Lezekai is the primordial beast of the land of Earth. At this rate, it won't take any longer than a year for the slumbering realm to awaken completely, and Lezekai with it. But how are we making it go against the corruption? Lena finally asked after processing his words. That is the neat part, we don't have to get involved at all. Lezekai is the guardian of Earth's land. When corruption is eating away at his domain, won't they be natural enemies? To begin with, the blacksmith proposed his hypothesis. Seems a little too vague to bet the fate of the whole world on, don't you think? Lena asked doubtfully. But is it any worse than selling out to some god to beg for their mercy? Who knows what they may ask of us? Would there even be any god willing to move on a condition we could agree to with a clean conscience? The blacksmith countered. Gods were not non-profit organization. Everything they did was to increase their faith. Even altruistic acts or acts of boredom always had this side effect. Seth couldn't imagine any god helping without trying to force a congregation of their church onto Earth, and that was the smallest price he could think of. Okay then, how about this? We start monitoring the chasm for now and start looking for a church whose god would be willing to help. There is no loss in looking at the possibilities. Maybe we won't even find one before Lezekai awakens, but if we do and the price is acceptable, we won't tempt fate. On the other hand, if we don't find one in time, we wait for Lezekai to awaken. If the beast does as you say, everything will be dealt with, but if it doesn't make its move against the chasm, we will at least know the options we have to deal with to still save the situation. Mary suggested a compromise both could agree to. Fine, let's do that, the Tower Master agreed. There was no reason to refuse if the help of a god came cheaper than Seth expected. Maybe there was even a chance that one of their allied gods grew strong enough to help. On another note, since Allison has technically finished her journey, How are the plans to spread the seeds? Seth asked about their original plans. After all, the whole reason they sent Allison and the others into the Green Hell was to share it with Spacia. Drosy and the other Taija volunteered for the task. Once Karina has prepared the seeds, they will use the remaining stone gate to enter the frontier world and infiltrate Spacia from there. We decided to provide them with the invisibility cloaks of the scene to ease their mission, Lena explained. All right, that means the only one we are waiting on now is Mike. At least for this matter. Is there any news of his party? Seth asked. There were no significant updates after they helped Adam and departed from THRES. It seems like the whole of the unclaimed mountains is now infested by beasts and people, infected by these worms, Mary explained. So far, he has placed 2 gates, but he is still looking for the perfect place to set up the 3rd one, she explained Mike's current progress. After the invasion of Spacia, Minasmar was able to take possession of 7 sets of stone gate and 1 massive spatial gate, thanks to Idyllin Mo's hard work. The spatial wizard had closed all but 1 gate, they kept up for access to Spacia. Of the remaining 7 sets, 3 halves were given to Mike. The chosen of Mahis would set them up as anchors in the unclaimed mountains, while Drosy and the other would set up their other halves on key worlds of Spacia, to create a spatial connection and allow the hordes of cybernetic monsters to bother someone else. Good, then Drosy and the others can set off, once Allison delivered the material and Karina makes the seeds, Seth mumbled. With some luck, they would be able to stabilize the pending catastrophes by the time the chasm became critical. To change the subject again. How about we hold a joint welcome party for Paolo and Monique the day after tomorrow?